You better start earning your keep. Those were the first words my stepfather screamed at me while I lay in a hospital bed, barely conscious after emergency surgery. My body was still numb, my thoughts slow and foggy, my legs refusing to move the way they used to. I remember the sharp smell of disinfectant, the quiet beeping of machines, and the heavy pressure in my abdomen every time I tried to breathe. I told him I couldn't work yet. The doctor had been clear. 2 weeks. No lifting. No standing for long hours. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't asking for sympathy. I was simply explaining. His response wasn't concern. It wasn't frustration. It was rage. The slap came so suddenly that my brain didn't register it at first. 1 second I was lying against the pillow, the next I was sliding off the bed, tangled in sheets, crashing onto the cold tile floor. Pain exploded through my side. Blood flooded my mouth. I tasted metal and realized my lip had split open. "Stop pretending you're weak," he barked, standing over me. That was the moment the room filled with chaos. Nurses rushed in. Someone shouted for security. Hands reached for me, telling me not to move. When the police arrived, they took one look at my blood-stained hospital gown, the 4-stand tipped over, and my stepfather standing there trying to explain with a tight, rehearsed smile. What they didn't know was this wasn't the worst thing he'd done. My name is Emma. I'm in my late 20s. And before that hospital bed became the center of my world, my life was busy but manageable. I worked retail during the day and took on freelance creative projects at night. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. More importantly, it kept the lights on in the house my real father left behind. My dad died after long illness. The kind that quietly drains savings invoice by invoice until you're too exhausted to argue with the numbers anymore. After the funeral, the house felt hollow. His jacket still hung by the door. His coffee mug stayed untouched in the sink. My mom tried to stay strong, but grief bent her a little more every month. That's when my stepfather entered our lives. At first he seemed like a solution. Polite. Confident. The kind of man who spoke in plans instead of condolences. He offered to help organize payments, promised to handle the financial stress so my mom could finally rest. 6 months later they were married. I remember watching him carry boxes into the house, acting like he had always belonged there. At first nothing felt wrong. Then small things began to change. Bills stopped appearing on the kitchen table. Payments were handled. My mom stopped checking bank accounts because she didn't need to anymore. When I asked questions, I was told not to worry. When I pushed, I was reminded how lucky we were to have someone willing to take charge. Slowly my mom changed too. She became tired. Forgetful. She would lose her train of thought mid-sentence, stare at the stove like she couldn't remember why it was on. My stepfather brushed it off as stress. Every morning he lined up vitamins neatly on the counter and watched until she swallowed them. I kept working. I paid rent to stay in my childhood bedroom. I told myself this was adulthood. Compromise. Family. Then my appendix ruptured. The pain came fast and violent, folding me in half on the bathroom floor. Surgery followed. When I woke up, my body felt rearranged without my consent. The doctor told me I needed time. 2 weeks. No work. That's what I told my stepfather from the hospital bed. And that's when everything changed. The hospital room was too bright that morning. White walls. White sheets. The steady electronic hum made time feel thick and slow. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counting cracks to distract myself from the pain pulling at my side. Then he walked in. No greeting. No concern. Just the door shutting behind him and his reflection in the metal cabinet. He talked about money before he even reached my bed. Bills. Payments. How things were backing up. How I needed to pull my weight. When I told him again that I physically couldn't work yet, he laughed. Not loud. Just enough to sting. You better start earning your keep. When I repeated myself softer this time, his face changed. Not explosive anger. Something colder. Controlled. Like something inside him clicked into place. Then his hand hit my face. That slap wasn't a loss of control. It was a declaration. And as I lay on the hospital floor staring up at fluorescent lights, I finally understood something that would change everything. I was no longer family to him. I was a problem. I was discharged a day later than planned. Not because my incision had reopened, but because everyone suddenly moved slower around me, as if I might shatter if they breathed too hard. Nurses spoke gently. Doctors double-checked everything. No one said it out loud, but the slap had changed how they saw my situation. While my stepfather argued with the front desk about parking validation, a nurse slipped a folded card into my discharge paperwork. She didn't explain it. He didn't need to. She just met my eyes and gave the smallest nod, the kind that carries more meaning than words. I didn't look at the card until later that night. Home felt different when we returned. Quieter. Smaller. Like the walls had leaned in. My mom hovered around me, hands half raised, unsure whether to touch or step back. She apologized constantly, for the noise, the light, for taking up space. She forgot where she put her glasses. Forgot what day it was. He acted like nothing had happened. He cooked dinner. He joked. He told a long story about traffic and laughed at his own punchline. When my mom took too long to answer a question, he finished her sentences. When she winced, he handed her the same vitamins he always did, lined up on the counter like obedient little soldiers. Pain medication blurred the edges of my days, but it sharpened something else. Patterns. The way my mom's confusion seemed worse after certain meals. The way paperwork disappeared the moment I asked about it. Payments I knew I had made that somehow no longer existed. The way he insisted on handling anything that involved money, insurance, or documents. That folded card sat on my nightstand until everyone was asleep. It had a website on it. I lay in bed scrolling until my eyes burned. Financial control. Medical manipulation. Isolation disguised as care. The words felt uncomfortably familiar, like someone had written them while watching our life through a window. A few days later, our neighbor knocked on the door with a container of soup. She stood in the kitchen and watched my mom shuffle past, then leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Something isn't right," she whispered. Her daughter worked in healthcare. She had noticed the bottles. The dosages. The changes. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I went into the room he kept locked. The lock was cheap. The room wasn't. Folders were stacked neatly. Papers labeled with words like insurance, benefits, coverage. I told myself I'd just glance, just enough to reassure myself I was being paranoid. One page was enough. Then another. Policies in my mom's name. Large amounts. Dates that lined up far too perfectly with her decline. My hands shook, but my thoughts were suddenly clear. This wasn't chaos. It was planning. I put everything back exactly as I found it. Every folder. Every paper. I locked the door behind me and went back to bed, staring at the ceiling until morning. Fear pressed heavy on my chest, but beneath it was something else. Focus. I stopped confronting him. I stopped asking questions. I let him believe I was still broken. Still fragile. Still afraid. He relaxed when he thought he had won. While he relaxed, I watched. Once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. I replayed moments in my head like security footage on a loop. The timing of my mom's worst days. The way her hands shook more after breakfast than dinner. The way he hovered when she took her vitamins, watching until she swallowed, as if it mattered more than anything else in the room. I stopped thinking of my life emotionally and started thinking of it like a case. Distance gave me clarity. I didn't flinch when he snapped. I didn't argue when he talked over my mom. I nodded. I stayed quiet. I moved slowly like I was still healing. He liked that version of me. He mistook silence for surrender. Behind his back, I began connecting dots. Late at night, I searched names, old addresses, public records. It didn't take long. The first woman appeared. Then another. Then another. Different states. Same pattern. Fast relationships. Shared finances. Sudden illnesses. Ugly endings. I sent one careful message. No accusations. Just a question. Her reply came an hour later. You too. That was the moment I knew I wasn't imagining any of this. We talked for hours. Then she added me to a small group. Women who had lived some version of my life. They didn't speak with drama or rage. Just facts. Dates. Documents. Behaviors so similar it made my stomach turn. One of them worked in legal support. Another kept everything. Every payment. Every email. They didn't tell me what to do. They just told me I wasn't alone. The next piece came from closer to home. Our neighbor's daughter stopped by one afternoon, pretending to check on my mom. She watched quietly as my stepfather prepared a smoothie, mixing in powder from an unmarked container. Later, when we were alone, she told me she couldn't diagnose anything without tests, but she didn't like what she was seeing. The combinations. The amounts. The symptoms. It explains a lot, she said softly. That was enough. I began documenting everything. Conversations, schedules, meals, his phone calls, his insistence on controlling finances. I didn't touch his things again. I didn't need to. He was careless now. Confident. And that confidence would become his biggest mistake. Once my stepfather relaxed, everything became easier to see. Confidence made him careless. He talked more freely on the phone, assuming no one was listening. He left documents out longer than he used to. He smiled like a man already spending money that didn't belong to him. I didn't rush. Rushing would have exposed me. Instead, I documented quietly. Dates, times, patterns. The way he prepared meals. The way my mom's confusion peaked afterward. The way he insisted on being present whenever she signed or discussed anything important. I didn't exaggerate or dramatize. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. Then he made his move. One evening he came home with a folder tucked under his arm, smiling in a way that made my stomach tighten. He said it was just paperwork. He said the lawyer recommended it since my mom had been confused lately. He used the word temporary more than once, like repetition could turn it into safety. Power of attorney. My mom's hand shook as she reached for the pen. Something inside me snapped, but my voice stayed calm. I asked one simple question, as if I were still the quiet, recovering daughter he underestimated. Shouldn't we have someone else there for something this important? Just to make sure it's done right. For a moment, just a moment, he hesitated. Then he smiled and agreed. He said we'd schedule it for the following week. He acted generous, cooperative, reasonable. That week became everything. The women I'd connected with helped me understand what mattered legally. What crossed lines. What counted as evidence. I spoke to professionals quietly and carefully. I didn't plead or dramatize. I told the truth and showed what I had. They listened. Things moved faster than I expected after that. He announced one evening that he'd be out late for his community league, something he never missed. He left the house relaxed, joking, already planning a future built on theft and silence. Before he walked out, he kissed my mom on the forehead. I watched him go and felt nothing but resolve. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Then again. Then the house filled with calm voices. Badges appeared. Gentle hands helped my mom into a coat. A medical team asked questions she answered clearly for the first time in months. Boxes were brought in for documents. Devices were collected. Everything was done by the book. No shouting. No chows. Across town at the same time, someone tapped my stepfather on the shoulder. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later. How he laughed at first. How he tried to explain. How his confidence drained when they didn't laugh back. How the room went quiet when the cuffs came out. How the people he'd been boasting to just hours earlier stepped away, suddenly unsure they'd ever known him. When he was brought back to the house, it was already over. He saw my mom sitting safely on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, answering questions with a clarity I hadn't seen in months. He saw strangers carrying boxes out of his locked room. He saw me standing near the doorway, calm and steady, with no fear left to hide. For the first time, he looked small. He tried to talk to me. Tried to explain. Tried to bargain. He said I had misunderstood everything. Said he was only trying to help. Said families handle things privately. I didn't raise my voice. I told him the truth didn't need protecting. As they led him away, he turned once more, eyes sharp with something close to panic. The man who once yelled at me in a hospital bed couldn't find a single word that mattered. The aftermath came quickly. Medical testing confirmed what we suspected. Financial reviews uncovered things I hadn't even known to look for. More people came forward. Stories stacked on stories until denial had nowhere left to stand. My mom stayed in care for observation. Within days, the fog lifted. Color returned to her face. She cried when she understood what had been happening, then cried harder when she realized it was over. The house felt different without him. Not louder. Not emptier. Lighter. Neighbors stopped by. Friends we hadn't seen in years called. Women I had never met thanked me for speaking up because it gave them the courage to do the same. The man who once claimed ownership over our lives disappeared into a system designed to handle people exactly like him. And standing in the living room one evening, surrounded by boxes of evidence and the soft sound of my mom breathing evenly in the next room, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Safety. Not because he was gone, but because I finally understood my power. The change in my mom didn't happen overnight, but it was undeniable. Within days of being away from him, the fog began to lift. She slept through the night for the first time in months. She finished her sentences without drifting off or apologizing for forgetting what she was saying. The constant tremor in her hands eased, and the fear that had lived behind her eyes slowly faded. Doctors and specialists explained everything carefully, using measured language. They talked about interactions, long-term exposure, and how control can wear a person down without leaving obvious marks. My mom listened quietly, absorbing every word. When they finished, she reached for my hand the same way she used to when I was a kid crossing a busy street. That small gesture felt like getting her back. The house became ours again. Windows stayed open. Drawers remained where we left them. Bills were spread out on the kitchen table instead of hidden away. It was overwhelming, but it was honest. There were no secrets anymore. Only numbers, paperwork, and the slow process of rebuilding. The legal side moved forward without spectacle. Facts spoke for themselves. Financial records told a story too clear to ignore. More women came forward, their experiences echoing ours in ways that made my chest ache. Accountability followed, not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly. And for the first time in a long while, we weren't afraid of what came next. My mom stayed in care a little longer, not because she was weak but because she deserved safety. Each day she grew stronger. She laughed again, quiet at first, then without hesitation. She started choosing her own clothes, cooking her own meals, questioning things out loud instead of swallowing doubt. Watching her reclaim herself felt like watching a sunrise after a very long night. I went back to work slowly. Different hours. Different priorities. I stopped measuring my worth by how much I could endure. Instead, I focused on what actually mattered. I started volunteering, then training, helping others recognize signs we'd missed for so long. Not because I was fearless, but because I knew how silence feels. One evening, my mom hung a new photo in the hallway. Just the two of us. No explanations. Nos ados. It didn't replace anything that was lost. It simply marked where we stood now. Free. The future didn't feel loud or overwhelming anymore. It felt quiet in the best possible way. Safe. Ours. I'm telling you this because betrayal doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it comes offering help. Sometimes it sounds like concern wrapped in control. And sometimes it wears the face of family. If any part of this story felt familiar, know this: you are not alone and you are not imagining things. Patterns matter. Your instincts matter. And it's never too late to draw a line. If you've ever had to protect yourself or someone you love from the people closest to you, share your story in the comments. And subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because silence only wins when we let it.